The knock came at 12:17 a.m. on New Year's Eve, and Daniel Brooks knew, even before opening the door, that his carefully constructed life was about to shatter. Because standing in the flickering hallway light of his third-floor Chicago walk-up, frost still clinging to her designer coat, was Evelyn Cross. The Evelyn Cross, CEO of Meridian Industries. The woman whose signature decided the fate of 14,000 employees. The woman who'd never spoken to him beyond a polite nod in passing. And she was crying. Before we dive into this story, if you're enjoying it, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let's begin. The apartment was too quiet. Daniel Brooks had grown accustomed to silence over the years, the particular kind that settles into a home after a child has been picked up for the weekend, after the laughter fades and the toys are put away, and the only sound left is the hum of the refrigerator and the distant pulse of a city that never truly sleeps. But tonight, New Year's Eve, the silence felt different, heavier, like it was waiting for something. He stood at the kitchen window of his modest third-floor apartment, watching fireworks bloom over Lake Michigan. Distant explosions of gold and silver reflected off the ice-crusted water, each burst accompanied by muffled cheers from street parties blocks away. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, forgotten on the counter as midnight approached. Lucy's drawing was still magneted to the refrigerator, a crayon masterpiece of the two of them holding hands under a smiling sun. She'd made it last Tuesday, before her grandmother had picked her up for their New Year's tradition. "We're gonna watch the ball drop on TV, Daddy," she'd announced with 7-year-old enthusiasm, her gap-toothed smile lighting up the entryway. "Grandma says I can stay up until midnight." "That's way past your bedtime, kiddo," Daniel had said, kneeling to zip up her coat. "It's a special occasion," she'd replied seriously, mangling the word in that way that always made his chest ache with love. He'd kissed her forehead, breathed in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, and watched her skip down the hallway, her overnight bag bouncing against her legs. The door had closed behind them, and the silence had rushed in like water filling a ship. That was 14 hours ago. Now it was 12:16 a.m., and Daniel stood in his kitchen in a faded Northwestern t-shirt and sweatpants, watching strangers celebrate below. A couple stumbled down the sidewalk, arms around each other, laughing at some private joke. A group of college kids set off bottle rockets in the parking lot across the street, whooping as each one screamed into the sky. He'd been invited to 3 parties tonight, one by his supervisor at Meridian Industries, another by his neighbor Mrs. Chen, and a third by some guys from the building's maintenance crew. He'd politely declined all 3, offering the same excuse, early shift tomorrow. It wasn't technically a lie. He did have work at 7 a.m., but the truth was simpler and more complicated. He didn't want to be around people pretending everything was fine while the new year arrived with all its empty promises of fresh starts and reinvention. Daniel had learned the hard way that time didn't reset at midnight. The calendar changed, but the problems remained. The bills still needed paying. His daughter still needed a father who showed up, who was present, who didn't chase promotions and raises at the expense of bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes. He'd made that mistake once. Never again. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from his ex-wife, Jennifer. "Lucy's asleep. Happy New Year, Daniel. Hope you're doing okay." Short, polite. The kind of message that spoke volumes about how far they'd drifted since the divorce 3 years ago. He typed back, "Thanks. Happy New Year. Give her a hug from me when she wakes up." The fireworks were reaching their crescendo now, multiple batteries firing at once, turning the sky into a cascade of color and light. Daniel imagined Lucy pressed against her grandmother's window across town, eyes wide with wonder, small hands leaving prints on the glass. That image, that simple, perfect image, was enough. It had to be. He turned away from the window and was reaching for his cold coffee when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Deliberate. Too loud for this time of night. Daniel froze, his hand hovering over the mug. The knock came again, more insistent this time. He glanced at the microwave clock. 12:17 a.m. Setting down the coffee, he moved through the small living room, stepping over Lucy's forgotten stuffed rabbit near the couch. The building had a security door downstairs, which meant whoever was knocking had either been buzzed in or had followed another resident inside. Neither option was particularly comforting after midnight on New Year's Eve. He checked the peephole, expecting to see Mrs. Chen from down the hall. She sometimes forgot her keys when she went to take out the trash, or maybe one of the college kids from the second floor who'd locked themselves out during their pre-party. What he saw instead made his breath catch in his throat. Evelyn Cross stood in the hallway. For a moment, Daniel thought he was hallucinating. The CEO of Meridian Industries, the woman whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, whose net worth was estimated at somewhere north of $3 billion, who commanded boardrooms in New York and London and Tokyo, was standing outside his apartment door at 17 minutes past midnight on New Year's Eve. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of power suits and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she wore a long cashmere coat, still dusted with snow that was melting in the hallway's warmth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and even through the distortion of the peephole, Daniel could see her eyes were red-rimmed. She knocked again, softer this time, almost hesitant. Daniel opened the door. Up close, the transformation was even more striking. Evelyn Cross, the woman who'd built Meridian Industries from a struggling mid-sized manufacturing company into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in less than a decade, looked small, vulnerable, human. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice rough, like she'd been talking or crying for hours. "I apologize for the intrusion. I know it's late. I know this is inappropriate, but I need to speak with you." Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened at the plant? Was there an emergency? Had someone been injured? "Ms. Cross," he managed, his maintenance engineer's instinct kicking in. "Is everything all right? Is there a problem at—" "May I come in?" she interrupted, and there was something in her voice, a crack in the carefully maintained composure, that made him step aside without thinking. Evelyn Cross walked into his modest apartment, and the space immediately felt smaller. Not because of her physical presence, she was barely 5'6", but because of the sheer weight of her existence. This was a woman who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who sat across from senators and foreign dignitaries, who could buy this entire building with what she spent on business lunches. And she was standing in his living room next to Lucy's art table and his second-hand couch, looking utterly lost. "Can I take your coat?" Daniel asked, falling back on the basic politeness his mother had drilled into him. Evelyn hesitated, then unbuttoned the cashmere and handed it to him. Underneath, she wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, clothes Daniel had never imagined existed in her wardrobe. He hung the coat on the hook by the door, noting the designer label even as he tried not to think about how much it probably cost. "Would you like some coffee? I was just—" He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "No, thank you." She turned in a slow circle, taking in the apartment. Her gaze lingered on Lucy's drawings covering the refrigerator, the stack of picture books on the coffee table, the child-sized chair at the kitchen table. "You have a daughter." It wasn't a question, but Daniel answered anyway. "Lucy, she's 7. She's with her grandmother tonight." Evelyn nodded slowly, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or regret. "That's good. That she has family, people who—" She trailed off, seeming to lose her train of thought. The awkward silence stretched between them. Outside, a final volley of fireworks crackled, then faded, leaving only the ambient noise of the city. Daniel cleared his throat. "Ms. Cross, I don't mean to be rude, but why am I here?" She turned to face him fully, and in the warm light of his living room, Daniel could see the exhaustion etched into her features. Not just physical tiredness, but something deeper, a weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "That's what you want to ask?" It crossed my mind, yes. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Direct. I appreciate that." She moved to the window, looking out at the same view Daniel had been watching earlier. "I've been driving around for 3 hours. Just driving. Through the city, past the office, through neighborhoods I haven't seen in years. I drove past the apartment I lived in when I first moved to Chicago, 22 years old, fresh MBA, convinced I was going to change the world." She pressed her palm against the glass, leaving a brief print that faded almost immediately. "I ended up at Meridian's original facility on the south side, the one we closed 6 years ago. It's a storage warehouse now, but I sat in the parking lot, staring at it, remembering my first day there. I was 31, regional manager, terrified. The company was hemorrhaging money, morale was in the basement, and everyone was waiting for me to fail. Daniel didn't interrupt. He'd heard the story before, not from Evelyn herself, but from company lore. How she'd turned Meridian around through a combination of brutal efficiency and strategic brilliance. How she'd made the hard decisions no one else would make. I saved that plant, Evelyn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I cut costs, streamlined operations, negotiated new contracts. Within 2 years, we were profitable again. Within 5, I was CEO. She turned away from the window. And tonight, sitting in that parking lot, all I could think about was Marcus Williams. The name hit Daniel like a punch. Marcus Williams. Second shift supervisor at the Southside facility, father of 3, 47 years old. Dead from a heart attack 2 months after being laid off in Evelyn's first round of cuts. You remember him? Evelyn said, reading Daniel's expression. I worked under him for 6 months when I first started at Meridian, Daniel said quietly. He was a good man, great supervisor, knew everyone's names, everyone's kids' names. He used to bring donuts on Fridays. I never knew that. Evelyn's voice was hollow. I never knew about the donuts. I never knew he had a daughter who played violin, or that his wife was a cancer survivor, or that he'd worked at Meridian for 19 years. All I knew was that his position was redundant, and his salary was allocated to maintenance budget I could cut by 30%. She moved away from the window, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the apartment. I've been sitting in board meetings for the past 6 weeks, she said, reviewing a restructuring proposal. Phase 4, they're calling it. A necessary realignment of resources to maximize shareholder value and ensure long-term competitive positioning in an evolving market landscape. She spoke the corporate jargon with bitter precision. Do you know what that means in English, Mr. Brooks? Daniel had a sinking feeling he knew exactly what it meant. It means eliminating 1,200 positions across our North American facilities. It means shuttering 2 plants entirely and consolidating operations into 3 mega facilities with skeleton crews and automated systems. It means 1,200 people, people with families, mortgages, car payments, children who need braces and college funds, getting pink slips 2 weeks before Valentine's Day. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the city had grown quieter, the celebrations winding down as people headed home or to after-parties. The board votes on Monday, Evelyn said, January 3rd. I have 72 hours to make a recommendation, and She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I don't know what to do. Daniel stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. The CEO of Meridian Industries, one of the most powerful women in American business, standing in his cramped apartment at midnight, asking him, what? For advice? Permission? Absolution? Why are you telling me this? He asked. Why are you here? Evelyn met his gaze, and for the first time since she'd entered his apartment, Daniel saw past the title and the reputation to the person underneath. She looked terrified. Because 3 weeks ago, she said, I was doing a facility tour at Plant 7, the one where you work. Standard PR exercise, shake some hands, tour the floor, pretend I care about the quarterly safety metrics. And I saw you. You were in Bay 3 working on one of the hydraulic presses. It had jammed, and the line supervisor was panicking because we had a shipment deadline. Everyone was standing around arguing about protocols and work orders and whether to call an outside contractor. And she smiled faintly. You asked everyone to step back, grabbed your toolbox, and fixed it in 20 minutes. Daniel remembered that day. The press had been a nightmare, a seized valve that should have required a complete disassembly. He'd managed to work it free using a technique an old mentor had taught him years ago. The supervisor tried to praise you in front of me, Evelyn continued. Told you that kind of quick thinking was exactly why you deserved that promotion to floor manager. Do you remember what you said? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He remembered. You said no thank you. You said you'd turned down 3 promotions in the past 2 years because they all required evening shifts or weekend rotations, and you had a daughter who needed you home for dinner and bedtime stories. You said some things were more important than a bigger paycheck. The apartment felt very small suddenly. I thought about that conversation for days, Evelyn said. This man who could be making 50% more, climbing the ladder, building his career, and he chooses bedtime stories instead. I couldn't understand it. It seemed illogical, inefficient, a waste of potential. She moved to the couch and sat down heavily, like the weight of standing had become too much. Then tonight, I'm sitting in my office, corner suite, top floor, windows overlooking the entire city, reviewing these restructuring documents. 1,200 names, 1,200 Marcus Williamses. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had dinner with anyone who wasn't a business contact. Couldn't remember the last time someone told me the truth instead of what they thought I wanted to hear. Couldn't remember the last time I made a decision based on what was right instead of what was profitable. Daniel lowered himself into the armchair across from her, his mind racing. This was surreal, impossible, and yet here they were. I have 6 vice presidents, Evelyn said, a dozen senior advisors, consultants on retainer who charge more per hour than most of my employees make in a week. I can call any of them right now, and they'd answer on the first ring, and they'd tell me exactly what I want to hear. They'd assure me the restructuring is necessary. They'd show me the projections and the market analysis and the competitive benchmarking. They'd make it sound so reasonable, so inevitable. She looked up at Daniel, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. But I don't need someone to make it sound reasonable. I need someone to tell me the truth. Someone who chose bedtime stories over promotions. Someone who understands that numbers on a spreadsheet are people with families and lives and Friday donuts. Miss Cross, I need you to tell me, she interrupted, her voice breaking, how I'm supposed to look myself in the mirror knowing I destroyed 1,200 lives because it improved our quarterly earnings forecast by 8%. I need you to tell me how to sleep at night, how to be the kind of person who can make that choice and still call themselves a leader. The last word came out as almost a sob, and Evelyn pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. Daniel sat frozen, completely out of his depth. What was he supposed to say? He was a maintenance engineer. He fixed broken machines, not broken people. He certainly didn't have answers for problems involving billions of dollars and thousands of employees. But as he watched Evelyn Cross, this titan of industry, this woman who'd graced magazine covers and keynoted conferences, fall apart on his second-hand couch, he realized something. She hadn't come here for answers. She'd come here because she was drowning, and she needed someone to see her. Really see her. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just the person underneath, terrified and alone and carrying a weight that was crushing her. Slowly, Daniel stood and moved to the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of water from the filter pitcher Lucy had decorated with princess stickers, then returned and handed one to Evelyn. She took it with shaking hands, drinking deeply before setting it on the coffee table. I'm sorry, she said, wiping at her eyes. This is completely inappropriate. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't be dumping this on you. Maybe not, Daniel agreed, settling back into his chair. But you're here now, so let's talk about it. Evelyn looked up at him, surprise flickering across her tear-stained face. You want to know how to make this decision? Daniel asked. Then tell me about these 1,200 people. Not the positions being eliminated, the people. I don't understand. You said you didn't know Marcus Williams brought donuts on Fridays, that you didn't know about his daughter's violin or his wife's cancer. So tell me, what do you know about the 1,200 people whose lives you're about to change? Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her hands. I know they're primarily concentrated in 3 facilities, she said slowly, falling back on the corporate language. Plants 4, 7, and 9. Average tenure is 11.3 years. Demographics skew older. Average age is 42. 68% have dependents. Severance packages would be calculated based on stop. Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. Those are statistics. I asked about people. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant wail of a siren blocks away. I don't know them, Evelyn finally whispered. I don't know any of them. Not really. Then how can you decide their fate? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Evelyn stared at him, and something shifted in her expression, a crack in the foundation she'd built her entire career on. The projections show... She started, but Daniel shook his head. I don't want to hear about projections. I want to know if you've walked the floor of Plant 4 recently. If you know that Maria Rodriguez in assembly has 3 kids and brings homemade tamales for her shift every Christmas. If you know that James Patterson is 2 years from retirement and has already put down a deposit on an RV so he and his wife can finally take that cross-country trip they've been planning for 20 years. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I want to know if you understand that when you eliminate a position, you're not just removing a line item from a budget. You're telling someone that their years of loyalty, their expertise, their contribution, none of it matters as much as making the numbers work. You're sending them home to explain to their spouse, their kids, why everything's about to change, why they have to sell the house, or pull the kids out of private school, or give up on college savings. Evelyn's face had gone pale, but she didn't look away. You want the truth? Daniel continued. Here it is. There's no way to make this decision that lets you sleep soundly. There's no perfect answer that makes everyone happy and keeps your conscience clean. If you approve this restructuring, 1,200 people suffer. If you don't, the board might remove you, and whoever replaces you might do something even worse. That's leadership. That's the weight you carry when you sit in that chair. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark city. But here's the thing you need to ask yourself, Ms. Cross. Are you making this decision because it's the only option, or are you making it because it's the easiest option? Because those are very different things. When he turned back, Evelyn was staring at him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Plant 7, where I work, Daniel said. We've been running at reduced capacity for 18 months while management evaluates long-term viability. But the equipment is solid. The workforce is skilled. The location is strategically positioned for regional distribution. Every person on that floor knows we could be running at 90% capacity if corporate would invest in modernizing 2 production lines and upgrading our logistics software. The capital expenditure, Evelyn started, would cost less than 6 months of your annual executive bonus pool, Daniel interrupted. I know because I ran the numbers myself after the 3rd time I turned down that promotion. I've got spreadsheets showing exactly how much it would cost to upgrade plants 4, 7, and 9 to competitive operational standards. Want to know what I found? Evelyn nodded slowly. The total investment would be roughly equivalent to what you're planning to spend on severance packages for 1,200 employees. Except one option keeps people working and productive. The other option destroys lives and decimates communities while maybe improving your quarterly earnings report. Daniel moved back to his chair and sat down, meeting Evelyn's gaze directly. You said you needed someone to tell you the truth. Here's the truth. You don't have to make this choice. You're being presented with a false binary, cut costs or fail. But there's a third option. It's harder. It's riskier. It requires actually investing in your workforce instead of treating them as expendable resources. It means telling your board that short-term profits matter less than long-term stability and the dignity of the people who make this company run. They'll fight me, Evelyn said quietly. The board, the shareholders. They'll say I'm being sentimental, naive. Probably, Daniel agreed. And you might lose. They might remove you as CEO. Your stock might take a hit. All of that is possible. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror. You'll sleep at night knowing you fought for something that mattered, and 1,200 people will keep their jobs, their dignity, their hope for the future. Evelyn sat very still, processing this. Outside, the city continued its late-night rhythm, cars passing, distant music, the occasional burst of laughter from people making their way home. I don't know if I'm that brave, she finally said. Neither did I, Daniel replied. The first time I turned down a promotion, I was terrified. My ex-wife was furious. She wanted the bigger house, the private schools, all the things that came with moving up. She said I was throwing away my career for sentimentality, that I'd regret choosing my daughter over my future. He glanced at Lucy's drawings on the refrigerator. We got divorced a year later. She has primary custody, and I see Lucy every other weekend and Wednesday nights. And you know what? I've never regretted my choice. Not once. Because when Lucy looks at me, she sees a father who shows up, who keeps his promises, who chose her. Evelyn followed his gaze to the refrigerator, studying the crayon drawings with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. "Do you know what I see when I look in the mirror?" she asked softly. "I see someone who sacrificed everything, marriage, children, friendships, any semblance of a personal life, to build an empire. I'm 47 years old, worth $3 billion, and I have no one. No family waiting at home, no children drawing pictures for my refrigerator, no one who would miss me if I disappeared." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I thought power would fill that void, that success would be enough. But tonight, sitting in my office looking at those restructuring documents, I realized I've become the thing I used to hate. The kind of executive who sees people as numbers, who makes calculated decisions about other people's suffering from the safety of a corner office." She stood abruptly, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "My father worked in a factory for 37 years, she said. Union job, good benefits. He wasn't ambitious, never wanted to climb the ladder or make a name for himself. He just wanted to provide for his family. And then, 3 years before his retirement, the company restructured. His position was eliminated in favor of cheaper automated systems." Daniel could hear the pain beneath her carefully controlled voice. He spent those last 3 years bouncing between part-time jobs. Never enough hours to qualify for benefits. Too young for Social Security, too old for anyone to hire full-time. He died 6 months after he finally retired. Massive stroke. The stress had literally killed him. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "I swore I'd never let that happen again. That I'd build something better. Something that valued loyalty and experience. And somewhere along the way, I became exactly what destroyed him. I became the executive making restructuring decisions. Eliminating positions. Choosing profits over people." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Daniel stood and joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone. "My daughter asked me a question last week," he said quietly. "She wanted to know why I don't have a big office like her friend's dad, why we live in an apartment instead of a house, why we can't go to Disney World like her classmates." He smiled faintly at the memory. "I told her that every person gets to choose what matters most to them. Some people choose big houses and important jobs. Other people choose time with the people they love. Neither choice is wrong, they're just different, and I chose her." "What did she say?" Evelyn asked. "She hugged me and said she was glad I chose her. Then she went back to coloring." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "That's it. That's the entire reward. A hug and going back to coloring. No promotion, no raise, no corner office. Just knowing that in that moment, I was exactly where I was supposed to be." He turned to face Evelyn fully. "You asked me how to make this decision, how to live with yourself afterward. I can't tell you that. But I can tell you this. Every choice we make defines us. Not our intentions, not our justifications, our actions. What we actually do when it costs us something." Evelyn turned from the window, and in the dim light of the apartment, Daniel could see tears streaming down her face. Not the careful, controlled crying from earlier, but something rawer, more real. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being strong, of having all the answers, of making impossible choices and pretending they don't destroy me inside." And then, without planning it, without thinking about propriety or professional boundaries, or the massive power differential between them, Daniel did something that surprised them both. He hugged her. It was brief, respectful, just a moment of human connection between two people who'd both been carrying too much alone for too long. And when they stepped apart, something had shifted. The CEO and the maintenance engineer had fallen away, leaving just two people trying to navigate an impossible situation. "Tell me about the third option," Evelyn said, wiping her eyes. "The one you said was harder and riskier. I want details, numbers, a real plan." Daniel felt something kindle in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. "Let me grab my laptop," he said. "What?" They sat at Daniel's small kitchen table until nearly 4 in the morning, Lucy's chair pushed aside to make room for Daniel's battered laptop and the notes he'd accumulated over 2 years of analyzing Meridian's operational inefficiencies. Evelyn was ruthlessly intelligent, cutting through Daniel's explanations to ask pointed questions about feasibility, timelines, potential obstacles. But she was also genuinely listening, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but actually considering what he was saying. The logistics software alone would save Plant 7 40 hours of labor per week, Daniel explained, pulling up a spreadsheet he'd built during his lunch breaks. Right now, we're manually tracking shipments, reconciling inventory, generating reports. It's 1990s technology trying to compete in 2025. Implementation timeline? Evelyn asked, leaning forward to study the numbers. 8 weeks for full deployment if we use an agile rollout methodology. Start with one plant as proof of concept, work out the bugs, then scale across the network. Cost overruns? Budgeted at 20% above estimates as buffer, but the software vendor has a fixed price contract option with penalty clauses for delays. Evelyn nodded slowly, making notes on her phone. What about the production line modernization? Daniel pulled up another spreadsheet, this one showing equipment life cycles, maintenance costs, and projected efficiency gains from upgrading outdated machinery. Plants 4 and 7 are running equipment that's 15 to 20 years old, he said. We're spending a fortune on maintenance and repairs, dealing with constant downtime, losing productivity to equipment failures. Newer systems would pay for themselves in reduced maintenance costs within 3 years, and the efficiency gains would increase output by 18 to 22%, which would allow us to take on new contracts instead of turning them away, Evelyn murmured, seeing the bigger picture. Exactly. Last quarter alone, we lost 4 major bids because we couldn't guarantee delivery timelines with our current capacity constraints. They worked through the numbers methodically: capital expenditures, projected returns, risk assessments, implementation challenges. Daniel had thought about this for so long, worked the calculation so many times, that he could answer most of her questions without hesitation. As the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Evelyn sat back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. This is viable, she said, sounding almost surprised. Aggressive, risky, but viable. Why hasn't anyone presented this to me before? Daniel hesitated, then decided truth was the only option. Because it requires short-term pain for long-term gain. Your executives are incentivized on quarterly performance. Approving major capital expenditures would hurt their bonuses this year, even if it makes the company stronger 5 years from now. They'd rather cut costs, which looks good immediately, than invest in the future. Evelyn's expression darkened. And I've let that culture flourish. You've rewarded it, Daniel said gently. Not intentionally, maybe, but when you promote the executives who hit their quarterly targets regardless of how they do it, you're telling everyone that short-term numbers matter more than long-term sustainability. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the numbers on the screen. If I propose this to the board, she finally said, they'll fight me. They'll question my judgment, my leadership. Some will push for my removal. Probably, Daniel agreed. The stock will take a hit when we announce major capital expenditures instead of the cost-cutting measures they're expecting. Almost certainly. I'll lose political capital, trust, possibly my position. It's possible. Evelyn met his gaze, and in her eyes, Daniel saw something he hadn't seen when she'd first arrived: determination. But 1,200 people keep their jobs. Yes, and we build something sustainable instead of just profitable. Yes. She closed the laptop and stood, moving to the window where the sky was now definitely lighter, the deep blue of pre-dawn giving way to pale gray. I have 72 hours until the board meeting, she said. I need to turn these ideas into a formal proposal. Financial models, implementation plans, risk mitigation strategies. I need it to be bulletproof. I can help with, Daniel started, but she shook her head. You've done more than enough. You've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost: perspective, clarity, the courage to even consider an alternative. She turned from the window, and in the growing light, she looked different than when she'd arrived. Still exhausted, still carrying the weight of an impossible decision, but no longer quite so lost. I can't promise this will work, she said. I can't promise the board will approve it, or that the plan will succeed even if they do, but I can promise I'll fight for it, that I'll stand in that boardroom and make the case for doing the right thing instead of the easy thing. Daniel stood as well, feeling the exhaustion of the long night settling into his bones. That's all anyone can ask. Evelyn collected her coat from the hook by the door, buttoning it slowly. At the threshold, she paused and turned back. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, for your honesty, for your time, for... She gestured vaguely at the apartment, the table still covered with his notes, for seeing me as a person instead of just a title. Daniel, he said, just Daniel. A genuine smile, the first he'd seen from her all night, touched her lips. Daniel. And please, call me Evelyn. She extended her hand and he shook it, not the brief formal handshake of corporate courtesy, but something more substantial, a promise maybe, or at least an acknowledgement of what had passed between them. Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, fading into silence. Daniel closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. The CEO of Meridian Industries had spent 4 hours in his apartment, crying on his couch, planning a corporate revolution at his kitchen table. It felt surreal, impossible. And yet, as the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting his modest apartment in shades of gold and pink, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for himself. His life would continue exactly as before, trading promotions for bedtime stories, choosing presents over prestige. But for Evelyn. For the 1,200 employees whose fate hung in the balance. For the possibility that maybe, just maybe, one person choosing courage over comfort could actually make a difference. His phone buzzed, a text from his ex-wife. Lucy's up and asking for you. Video call? Daniel smiled and reached for his laptop, his exhaustion forgotten. Because some things, most things, were more important than sleep. Some things were more important than anything else in the world. The video call with Lucy lasted 20 minutes, her animated chatter about the fireworks and staying up until midnight filling Daniel's apartment with the kind of joy that made the sleepless night worthwhile. When she finally signed off with a gap-toothed grin and a promise to build a snowman when she got home, Daniel sat in the quiet aftermath, staring at his reflection in the darkened laptop screen. He looked exactly like a man who'd been up all night dismantling a CEO's worldview and rebuilding it from scratch. The coffee pot gurgled to life as he started a fresh brew, stronger this time. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across his living room, and the city outside was beginning its New Year's Day routine, slower, quieter, everyone nursing hangovers and broken resolutions. Daniel should sleep. He had to work tomorrow, today, technically, since it was already past 6 a.m. But his mind was racing, replaying the conversation, wondering if any of it would actually matter. Evelyn had seemed determined when she left, but that was easy at 4 in the morning in a maintenance engineer's apartment, surrounded by spreadsheets and possibility. Would she still feel that way when she walked back into her corner office, when her board members and advisors started pushing back, when the reality of what she was proposing set in? He was pouring his second cup of coffee when his phone rang. The number was unknown, but something made him answer. Mr. Brooks? Daniel? The voice was familiar, though he'd never heard it on the phone before. It's Evelyn. Evelyn Cross. I hope I'm not calling too early. Daniel glanced at the clock, 6:47 a.m. I'm up. Just had a video call with my daughter. Good. That's good. There was a pause, the sound of traffic in the background. I wanted to thank you again for last night and to let you know I'm moving forward with the proposal. I have my team pulling numbers right now. They're not happy about working New Year's Day, but they're doing it. That's good news, Daniel said, though something in her tone made him hesitate. Are you okay? Another pause, longer this time. I'm driving, just driving again, thinking. I didn't go home last night. I went straight to the office after leaving your place. Started making calls, sending emails, putting the pieces together. And about an hour ago, I realized I was doing exactly what I've always done. What do you mean? I was turning your ideas into a sterile corporate presentation, sanitizing the human element, making it palatable for the board by removing everything that made it matter. Her voice cracked slightly. I was taking your passion and turning it into bullet points. Daniel set down his coffee cup, listening. So I deleted it all, Evelyn continued, the entire presentation, and I'm starting over. Because if I'm going to ask the board to take a risk on people instead of profits, I need to show them why it matters. Not just the numbers, the why behind the numbers. That's going to be harder to sell, Daniel said carefully. I know. But you were right last night. I've been taking the easy path for too long, making the safe choice the profitable choice, the choice that protects my position and my reputation. And it's made me into someone I don't recognize. The vulnerability in her voice was striking, especially over the phone where she couldn't see his reaction, couldn't gauge whether he was judging her. Where are you driving to? Daniel asked. Plant 4. I'm going to walk the floor, talk to people, understand what I'm actually fighting for. I did the same thing at Plant 7 this morning, got there at 5:30, before the shift change. Talked to the night crew, asked about their families, their concerns, what they'd do if they lost their jobs. What did they say? They didn't trust me at first, thought it was some corporate exercise, management checking boxes. But I stayed, I listened. And Daniel, the things they told me, she trailed off, and he could hear her struggling with emotion. One woman, Rosa Martinez, she's been in assembly for 14 years. She told me she's supporting her disabled sister and 2 nephews. She said if she loses her job, they lose their apartment. Her nephews would have to change schools mid-year. Her sister would lose access to her physical therapy. Daniel closed his eyes, picturing the scenario playing out across 1,200 families. Another guy, Tim something, he didn't give me his last name, said he didn't trust management with it. He told me he's already worked 3 jobs during his lifetime that got restructured out from under him. He said at some point, you stop believing in loyalty or hard work because the company never shows you the same consideration you give them. He said the only reason he's still at Meridian is because it was the last place hiring when his previous employer eliminated his department. That sounds about right, Daniel said quietly. It shouldn't be, though. That's what's killing me. This is normal to them. They expect to be discarded. They've internalized that they're expendable, that no matter how hard they work or how loyal they are, eventually some executive they've never met will decide their position doesn't align with strategic objectives. Evelyn's voice had risen, passionate and angry in a way that Daniel suspected she rarely allowed herself to be. I did that, she continued. I created that culture. Every time I approved restructuring without fighting for alternatives, every time I prioritized quarterly earnings over long-term stability, I told them they didn't matter. And now I'm asking them to trust me when I say I want to do better. Are they willing to? Daniel asked. I don't know. Most of them seemed skeptical, but a few seemed hopeful. Like maybe if someone at the top actually gave a damn, things could change. She exhaled slowly. I'm almost at Plant 4. I should go. Evelyn? Daniel said, stopping her before she could hang up. What you're doing, walking the floors, talking to people, that matters. Even if the board rejects your proposal, even if this all falls apart, those conversations matter. Those people will remember that someone listened. I hope you're right, she said softly, because right now it feels like I'm trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. After she hung up, Daniel stood in his kitchen for a long moment, holding his phone and wondering what he'd set in motion. He'd thought Evelyn would take his ideas, polish them into a corporate presentation, and make a calculated pitch to her board. Instead, she was out there having a crisis of conscience in real time, confronting the human cost of decisions she'd been making for years. It was either going to change everything or destroy her career, possibly both. The next 48 hours passed in a strange limbo. Daniel went to work at Plant 7, where rumors were already swirling about restructuring plans and possible closures. Nobody knew anything concrete, but factory floors were ecosystems of information. Official memos mattered less than who was visiting which plant, which executives were having closed-door meetings, which consultants were reviewing which departments. Daniel kept his head down and his mouth shut, fixing equipment and dodging questions about whether he'd heard anything through his supervisor connections. The irony of knowing more than almost anyone in the building while being unable to say a word was not lost on him. Evelyn called him twice more, once on Friday evening, sounding exhausted but determined, to run through revised financial projections, and again on Saturday morning to ask his opinion on how to present the cultural shift she was proposing alongside the operational changes. The board understands numbers, she said, and Daniel could hear papers rustling in the background. But they don't understand why we need to fundamentally change how we value our workforce. How do I make them see that treating employees as assets instead of expenses isn't just ethically right, but strategically smart? Tell them about Rosa Martinez, Daniel suggested. Tell them about Tim, who's been restructured out of 3 jobs. Make it personal. They'll say I'm being emotional, that business decisions can't be based on individual anecdotes. Then tell them every anecdote multiplied by 1,200 represents a community crisis. Tell them that mass layoffs don't just affect the people losing jobs. They affect local economies, school districts, housing markets. Tell them Meridian has a choice between being part of the problem or part of the solution. There was a long silence on the other end. You should be in that boardroom with me, Evelyn finally said. That's definitely not my place, Daniel replied, uncomfortable with the suggestion. Maybe it should be. Maybe that's part of the problem. The people making decisions are completely isolated from the people affected by those decisions. It was an interesting point, but Daniel couldn't imagine himself in a boardroom full of executives and investors. He'd be as out of place as Evelyn had been in his apartment that first night, although he reflected she'd seem to find her footing eventually. Sunday arrived with the weight of an execution date. The board meeting was tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Evelyn had texted him at midnight, just 3 words. Presentation is ready. Daniel tried to focus on normal Sunday activities, grocery shopping, cleaning the apartment, FaceTiming with Lucy, who was full of stories about building snowmen with her grandmother. But his mind kept drifting to tomorrow, to Evelyn walking into that boardroom with a proposal that went against every instinct of modern corporate efficiency. He was making dinner, pasta with the sauce Lucy liked, saving her a container for when she came home tomorrow, when his phone rang again. I need a favor, Evelyn said without preamble. Her voice was tight, strained. And I'll understand if you say no. What kind of favor? I want you at the board meeting tomorrow, not presenting, just there, in the room. So when I'm making the case for why we should invest in people instead of eliminating positions, the board members can see one of those people, can see why this matters. Daniel's stomach dropped. Evelyn, I'm a maintenance engineer. I don't belong in a board meeting. That's exactly why you do belong. Because this decision affects you, affects everyone who works at Meridian. The board makes these choices in a vacuum, looking at spreadsheets and projections without ever confronting the reality of what they're deciding. Your presence reminds them there are real stakes here. I have to work tomorrow, Daniel said, grasping for practical objections. I'll clear it with your supervisor. You'll be there as my guest, paid time, no impact on your position. Evelyn, please. The word was raw, almost desperate. I can walk in there alone and make my case, and they'll listen politely and probably vote it down. Or you can be there, and maybe they'll see past the numbers to the actual human beings they're affecting. I'm not asking you to speak or do anything except exist in that space, but your existence matters. Daniel looked around his modest apartment, at Lucy's drawings, and his secondhand furniture, and the life he'd built choosing presence over ambition. This was so far outside his comfort zone, it might as well be another planet. What time? He heard himself say. 8:30, corporate headquarters, executive floor. I'll have security expecting you. After he hung up, Daniel sat on his couch for a long time, wondering what he'd just agreed to and whether he was about to make a terrible mistake. The Meridian Industries corporate headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in downtown Chicago, all glass and steel and the kind of architectural ambition that screamed success. Daniel had never been inside. Maintenance engineers worked at the plants, not the pristine executive offices where decisions were made and futures were determined. He wore his only suit, a navy blue one he'd bought for his grandmother's funeral 3 years ago and hadn't worn since. It fit poorly, a bit tight in the shoulders, and his shoes were scuffed despite his best efforts to polish them the night before. Walking through the marble lobby at 8:15 on Monday morning, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits carrying leather briefcases, Daniel felt like an imposter. The security guard checked his ID against a list, made a phone call, then directed him to a private elevator that required a key card to access. The ride to the 34th floor was smooth and silent, nothing like the rattling freight elevators at Plant 7. When the doors opened, Evelyn was waiting. She looked different than she had in his apartment, back in her armor of a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her hair styled, her expression controlled and professional. But when she saw him, something in her face softened. "You came," she said simply. I said I would. People say a lot of things. She gestured down a corridor lined with abstract art and potted plants that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. The board is gathering now. I need you to understand something before we go in there. They stopped at a window overlooking the city, and Evelyn turned to face him fully. What happens in that room today will determine the future of Meridian Industries and everyone who works there. If the board approves my proposal, we commit to a path that prioritizes sustainability over short-term profits. If they don't, she paused, choosing her words carefully. If they don't, I'll resign. I won't be the person who signs off on destroying 1,200 lives just to protect my position. Daniel stared at her, shocked. Evelyn, you can't. I can, and I will. I've spent the last 72 hours remembering who I used to be, before the corner offices and the billion-dollar deals, before I forgot that numbers on spreadsheets represent real people with real lives. If I compromise on this, I lose whatever's left of that person, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see the fear beneath the determination. She was risking everything, her career, her reputation, the empire she'd built over 2 decades. And she was doing it because a maintenance engineer had challenged her to see past the numbers to the people behind them. The board is going to see me as weak, Evelyn continued, emotional. They'll question my judgment and my leadership. Some will push for my removal regardless of whether they approve the proposal. I need you to know that your presence in that room might not change anything. It might not be enough. But it might be, Daniel said quietly. Yes, it might be. They stood there for a moment, 2 people from completely different worlds, united by a shared belief that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the profitable thing. Let's go make your case, Daniel said. The boardroom was exactly what he'd imagined. A long table of polished wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city that probably intimidated anyone who sat on the opposite side of that table. 12 board members were already seated, ranging in age from a woman who looked barely 40 to a man who had to be pushing 75. They were reviewing documents, checking phones, engaged in quiet conversations that stopped abruptly when Evelyn entered with Daniel behind her. The silence was immediate and uncomfortable. Every eye in the room locked onto Daniel, and he could see the questions forming. Who is this? Why is he here? What's going on? Evelyn moved to the head of the table with the kind of confidence that came from years of commanding rooms exactly like this one. Daniel took a seat along the wall where she'd indicated, trying to make himself as small as possible while simultaneously feeling like he was taking up too much space. Good morning, Evelyn began, her voice clear and authoritative. Thank you all for being here. I know you were expecting a straightforward presentation on the Phase 4 restructuring proposal. What you're going to get instead is something different. She clicked a button on the remote, and the screen behind her lit up, not with the corporate presentation Daniel had expected, but with a photograph. Rosa Martinez, the woman Evelyn had mentioned from Plant 7, smiling at the camera in her work uniform, safety goggles pushed up on her forehead. This is Rosa Martinez, Evelyn said. She's been with Meridian for 14 years, working assembly at Plant 7. She supports her disabled sister and 2 nephews on her salary. If we approve the Phase 4 restructuring as currently proposed, Rosa loses her job, her family loses their apartment, and her nephews have to change schools mid-year. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a silver-haired man Daniel didn't recognize, cleared his throat. Evelyn, while individual stories are certainly sympathetic, we can't base strategic decisions on what, Robert? On the actual human cost of our choices? Evelyn's voice was sharp. Rosa isn't an individual story. She's one of 1,200 people, 1,200 families that we're proposing to sacrifice for an 8% improvement in quarterly earnings. She clicked again, and the screen changed to show a different photo. A middle-aged man standing next to industrial equipment, wearing the same kind of work uniform Daniel wore every day. This is Marcus Williams. He was a supervisor at our Southside facility. 20-year tenure, excellent performance reviews, dedicated employee. I eliminated his position 6 years ago as part of a restructuring initiative. He died of a heart attack 2 months later. He was 47 years old. The room had gone very quiet. I never knew Marcus. Evelyn continued, and Daniel could hear the emotion creeping into her voice despite her obvious efforts to control it. I never knew he brought donuts for his team on Fridays. Never knew his daughter played violin or that his wife was a cancer survivor. All I knew was that his position was redundant and his salary represented a line item I could eliminate to hit my targets. She set down the remote and faced the board directly. I've spent the last 72 hours visiting our facilities, talking to employees, understanding what we're actually proposing to do. And I won't approve a restructuring plan that treats people as expendable resources, not when there's an alternative. The silver-haired man, Robert, leaned forward. What alternative? Evelyn, we've reviewed this proposal exhaustively. The market conditions, the competitive pressures, the financial realities, they all point to the same conclusion. We need to cut costs or risk long-term viability. That's a false binary, Evelyn said, and Daniel recognized his own words from their conversation. We're being presented with a choice between cutting costs or failing, but there's a third option, one that requires courage instead of capitulation. She pulled up a new presentation, Daniel's spreadsheets, his operational analyses, but presented with the kind of polish and detail that only Evelyn could provide. What if instead of eliminating 1,200 positions, we invested in modernizing our facilities and our workforce? What if we treated our employees as assets to develop rather than expenses to eliminate? For the next 30 minutes, Evelyn walked the board through the proposal with a level of detail and passion that Daniel found mesmerizing. She presented the numbers, capital expenditures, projected returns, implementation timelines. But she also presented the why, the cultural shift, the long-term strategic advantage of having a loyal, skilled workforce instead of a rotating door of disposable labor. The board members asked questions, pushed back, raised objections. Some were clearly hostile to the idea, their questions designed to poke holes rather than understand possibilities. But others seemed genuinely intrigued, leaning forward, taking notes, asking for clarification on specific points. And through it all, Daniel sat against the wall, a silent reminder of who they were actually talking about. Every time the discussion veered too far into abstract corporate strategy, someone's gaze would flick to him, and they'd be reminded that real people were at stake here. Finally, Robert raised his hand, silencing the discussion. Evelyn, I appreciate the passion behind this proposal. Truly, I do. But we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. We can't make decisions based on sentiment or moral philosophy. We have to consider return on investment, competitive positioning, market realities. And I'm telling you, Evelyn replied, her voice steel-wrapped in silk, that investing in our workforce is the smartest competitive positioning we could possibly make. Every dollar we spend on automation and cost-cutting is a dollar our competitors spend too. But building a culture of loyalty and innovation, that's a competitive advantage they can't replicate by eliminating positions. The numbers don't support that conclusion, another board member, a younger woman in a severe black suit, interjected. The restructuring plan shows clear financial benefits in both the short and medium term. At what cost? The question came from Daniel before he could stop himself. Every head in the room swiveled toward him, and he felt his face flush. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to... No, Evelyn said quickly. Please, continue. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling completely out of his depth, but unable to stop now that he'd started. I've worked at Meridian for 8 years, he said, his voice rough with nerves. I've seen 3 rounds of restructuring in that time, and every time management promised the cuts would make us stronger, more competitive, more efficient. But you know what actually happened? Morale tanked. Productivity dropped because we were expected to do the same work with fewer people. The experienced workers who knew the equipment and the processes, they left for competitors who valued them. And we spent more money training replacements than we saved eliminating positions. He could feel his hands shaking, but he pressed on. Ms. Cross asked me why I turned down 3 promotions. It's because I watch good people get chewed up by a system that treats them as expendable. I watch supervisors burn out trying to meet impossible targets with inadequate resources. I watch families fall apart because someone was working 60-hour weeks just to cover the work that used to be done by a full crew, and I decided my daughter deserved a father who was present more than I deserved a bigger paycheck. The room was absolutely silent. You want to know the cost of this restructuring? Daniel continued, surprised by the steadiness in his voice now. It's not just 1,200 severance packages. It's the institutional knowledge that walks out the door when you eliminate experienced workers. It's the trust you destroy with the people who remain, who now know their loyalty means nothing. It's the communities that suffer when major employers pull out. It's the families that fracture under financial stress. Add all that up and tell me if an 8% improvement in quarterly earnings is worth it. He sat back, his heart pounding, unable to believe he'd just lectured a boardroom full of executives and investors about business strategy. Robert was staring at him with an expression Daniel couldn't read. The severe woman looked annoyed, but a few of the other board members were nodding slowly, thoughtfully. "Who are you?" Robert asked finally. "Daniel Brooks," he said quietly. "Maintenance engineer at Plant 7. And Evelyn brought you here to... what? Provide the human face to her proposal?" "I brought him here," Evelyn said before Daniel could respond, "because the people in this room need to understand that our decisions affect real lives. That behind every position we eliminate is a person like Daniel, someone who chose loyalty to Meridian over career advancement, who believes in what we're building, who deserves better than to be treated as a line item in a cost-cutting exercise." She moved to stand beside Daniel's chair, a gesture of solidarity that didn't escape the board's notice. "I'm proposing we approve a 3-year investment plan focused on modernization and workforce development instead of the Phase 4 restructuring. Yes, it will impact our quarterly earnings. Yes, it's riskier than the safe path of cost-cutting, but it's the right thing to do. And more than that, it's the smart thing to do if we want Meridian to still exist 10 years from now as more than a hollowed-out shell of what it used to be." Robert leaned back in his chair, studying both of them. "You're asking us to bet the company on workforce loyalty and long-term thinking in a market that rewards quarterly performance and cost efficiency." "I'm asking you to remember why Meridian exists in the first place," Evelyn replied. "Not to generate returns for shareholders, that's a byproduct. We exist to build things, to provide employment, to contribute to our communities. When we lose sight of that, when we reduce everything to profit margins and stock prices, we stop being a company and become just another financial instrument." The silence that followed felt eternal. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 1,200 futures hanging in the balance. Finally, one of the quieter board members, an older man who'd been taking notes throughout the entire presentation, spoke up. "I'd like to propose we table the Phase 4 restructuring vote and establish a committee to evaluate Evelyn's alternative proposal in detail. 6 weeks of deep analysis, comprehensive modeling, full impact assessment. Then we reconvene and make an informed decision with all the options clearly laid out." It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Robert looked around the table, gauging reactions. Several board members nodded. The severe woman looked like she wanted to object, but remained silent. "All in favor of tabling the restructuring vote pending committee review?" 8 hands went up, 4 remained down. "Motion carries," Robert said, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely happy about it. "Evelyn, you have 6 weeks to make your case. I suggest you use them wisely." The meeting adjourned shortly after, board members filing out with quiet conversations and sidelong glances at Daniel. Evelyn remained at the head of the table, her shoulders visibly sagging now that the performance was over. When they were alone, she turned to Daniel. 6 weeks, she said. "Not the victory I was hoping for, but better than an immediate rejection." "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now I build the most comprehensive business case ever assembled for why treating people well is actually profitable." She smiled faintly. "Think you can help me with that?" Daniel thought about his daughter, about Rosa Martinez and her family, about all the Marcus Williamses whose stories ended too soon because someone decided their positions didn't align with strategic objectives. "Yeah," he said, "I think I can do that." The 6 weeks that followed the board meeting consumed Daniel's life in ways he'd never anticipated. What started as occasional evening consultations with Evelyn evolved into something approaching a second job, reviewing operational data, interviewing employees across multiple facilities, building financial models that proved workforce investment wasn't just ethical but profitable. He'd arranged with his supervisor to shift his hours at Plant 7, working early mornings so he could spend afternoons at corporate headquarters, analyzing numbers and strategies with Evelyn's team. Lucy noticed the change immediately during their Wednesday night dinner. "Daddy, how come you're tired all the time now?" she asked, pushing her chicken nuggets around her plate with a fork. "You keep yawning." Daniel rubbed his eyes, fighting off another yawn even as she mentioned it. "I'm helping with an important project at work, kiddo. It's taking up a lot of time right now. Is it like when Mommy had her big work thing and couldn't come to my recital?" The comparison stung more than it should have. Jennifer had missed Lucy's spring recital 2 years ago because of a crucial client presentation, and Lucy had cried in the car afterward, asking why work was more important than watching her dance. "No," Daniel said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her small hand. "This is different. I promise. The project ends in a few weeks, and then things go back to normal. And I'll never miss your recitals, okay? Never." Lucy studied him with the uncanny perception that 7-year-olds sometimes possessed, seeing past adult reassurances to the truth underneath. "You promise?" she asked. "I promise." She seemed satisfied with that, returning her attention to her dinner. But Daniel felt the weight of that promise settling onto his shoulders alongside everything else he was carrying. Because the truth was, he wasn't entirely sure things would go back to normal. The work he was doing with Evelyn had cracked open something inside him, a recognition that maybe he'd been settling for less than he was capable of, choosing safety over impact. But impact came with costs, and he'd sworn he'd never let his ambitions come before his daughter again. The committee reviewing Evelyn's proposal met twice a week, each session a grueling examination of every assumption, every projection, every claim made in the alternative restructuring plan. Daniel attended most of these meetings, though his role remained unofficial, Evelyn's guest, not a formal participant. But his presence mattered. He could see it in how the discussion shifted when he was there, how the abstract talk of workforce metrics and productivity indices became more grounded, more human. Robert, the silver-haired board member who'd initially pushed back hardest, was the most difficult to read. He asked pointed questions, challenged every number, demanded evidence for claims that seemed self-evident to Daniel. But he also listened, really listened. And occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, Daniel caught him staring out the boardroom windows with an expression that suggested he was wrestling with something deeper than quarterly earnings. It was during the 4th committee meeting that everything nearly fell apart. They were reviewing the capital expenditure timeline when one of the board members, a man named Harrison, who represented a major institutional investor, dropped a stack of papers on the table with enough force to make everyone jump. "I've had enough of this charade," he announced, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "We've wasted a month on a proposal that fundamentally misunderstands how modern business operates. Evelyn, your romanticized vision of loyal workforces and community investment belongs in a different era. We're competing in a global market where efficiency and cost control determine survival." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw her hands tighten on her pen. "I disagree with your characterization, Harrison. What I'm proposing isn't romantic, it's strategic. Building institutional knowledge and workforce stability creates competitive advantages that can't be quantified on a balance sheet," Harrison interrupted. "You're asking us to sacrifice concrete, measurable returns for intangible benefits that may or may not materialize over an undefined timeline. That's not strategy. That's hope masquerading as business planning." "It's investment," Evelyn countered, her voice rising slightly. "The same way R&D is investment, the same way infrastructure is investment. We don't question spending millions on new equipment because we understand it increases productivity. Why is investing in the people who operate that equipment any different? Because equipment doesn't unionize. Equipment doesn't demand raises or complain about working conditions. Equipment doesn't leave for competitors who offer better benefits." Harrison leaned forward, his expression hard. "You're proposing we build our strategy around our most unpredictable, most expensive, most difficult to manage resource. It's fundamentally unsound." The casual dehumanization in his words, reducing employees to resources more troublesome than machinery, hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd heard variations of this sentiment before, muttered by middle managers and consultants, but never stated so baldly, so proudly. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. "Is that really what you think of the people who make this company run?" The room went silent. Harrison turned to look at him, and there was something close to contempt in his expression. I think, Harrison said slowly, that successful businesses are built on rational analysis, not emotional attachment to workforce composition. Rational analysis, Daniel repeated, struggling to keep his voice level. Like the rational analysis that said eliminating Marcus Williams's position would improve efficiency? How'd that work out for Marcus? For his family? For the institutional knowledge that walked out the door when you decided his 19 years of experience were less valuable than a percentage point on a spreadsheet? I don't know who Marcus Williams is, Harrison said dismissively. And frankly, individual cases aren't relevant to strategic planning. He died. Daniel's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. He died because the stress of losing his job 3 years before retirement literally stopped his heart. But you're right. That's just an individual case. So let's talk about the collective impact of your rational analysis. Let's talk about the Southside facility where morale is so low that turnover hit 40% last year. Let's talk about Plant 9 where productivity dropped 18% after the last round of cuts because the remaining workers are so burned out they can barely function. He stood, surprising himself with the intensity of his anger. You want to talk about efficiency? Fine. You know what's inefficient? Training new workers every 6 months because experienced ones keep leaving for companies that treat them like human beings instead of resources. Paying overtime because you don't have enough people to cover basic operations. Dealing with quality issues because nobody cares enough to catch problems before they become disasters. That's what your rational analysis creates. Harrison's face had gone red. I don't think I need a lecture on business fundamentals from a maintenance worker who... Stop. Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. She was standing now too, and there was something fierce in her expression that Daniel had never seen before. You don't get to dismiss Daniel because his job title doesn't impress you. He knows more about how this company actually operates than half the executives on our payroll combined. And more importantly, he has the courage to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. She turned to address the entire committee, her composure completely gone, replaced by raw passion. Harrison is right about one thing. I am asking you to take a leap of faith, to invest in something that can't be perfectly quantified or guaranteed. But you know what else can't be quantified? The cost of becoming the kind of company that treats human beings as inconvenient variables in an efficiency equation. The cost of looking in the mirror and knowing you chose profits over people when you had the power to choose differently. Evelyn, Robert started, but she cut him off. I've been that person. I've made those choices. I've signed the restructuring orders and approved the layoffs and convinced myself it was necessary, inevitable, just business. And it's made me into someone I barely recognize. Someone my father would be ashamed of. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Daniel could see tears forming in her eyes. My father died broke and broken, because executives like us decided his position didn't align with strategic objectives. And I became one of those executives. I climbed to the top by making the hard choices, the rational choices, the choices that prioritize shareholders over the people doing the actual work. And you know what I have to show for it? She gestured around the opulent boardroom. This, a corner office and $1 billion net worth, and absolutely nobody who gives a damn whether I live or die. No family, no real friends, just a collection of professional relationships built on mutual benefit and careful calculation. That's what rational analysis without humanity creates. Success so hollow, it echoes. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Harrison seemed stunned into speechlessness. Evelyn sank back into her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I can't make you vote for this proposal. I can't force you to believe that treating employees well is worth sacrificing short-term profits. But I can tell you that if we approve the Phase 4 restructuring, if we eliminate 1,200 positions to boost quarterly earnings, I won't be here to sign the order. I'll resign first, because I'd rather lose my position than lose whatever's left of my soul. Robert cleared his throat, and Daniel could see the older man was genuinely moved. His usual corporate composure cracked. Evelyn, I don't think anyone is questioning your commitment or your moral courage, but this committee has a responsibility to evaluate proposals objectively based on financial viability and strategic soundness. Personal feelings, however heartfelt, can't override our fiduciary duties. Then evaluate it objectively, Evelyn said, composing herself with visible effort. Look at the numbers without prejudice. The capital expenditure required is less than we spent on executive compensation last year. The projected returns exceed the savings from restructuring within 3 years. Employee retention alone would save us millions in recruitment and training costs. Every objective measure supports this approach. If you're willing to look beyond the next quarter and consider what builds lasting value. She pulled up a new set of data on the screen, and Daniel recognized his own analysis buried in the corporate presentation. Daniel spent 2 years documenting operational inefficiencies at Plant 7, not because it was his job, because he cared enough to understand why good people were being set up to fail. And what he found was that most of our productivity problems aren't workforce issues, they're investment issues, outdated equipment, inefficient processes, technology from the last century trying to compete in this one. She clicked through slides showing the comparative analysis. Current state versus proposed improvements, costs versus benefits, risks versus opportunities. We can spend $300 million eliminating positions and cutting costs. Or we can spend $320 million upgrading our facilities and developing our workforce. One approach destroys value and hope. The other builds both. The difference is $20 million and the courage to choose a harder path. Harrison was shaking his head before she finished. The risk profiles are completely different. Cost cutting is guaranteed returns. Investment is speculation. Everything is speculation, Daniel interjected, unable to stay quiet. You speculate that cutting costs won't destroy morale. You speculate that automation can replace institutional knowledge. You speculate that communities will tolerate being gutted for shareholder value. Those are all bets too. You're just more comfortable with them because they let you avoid responsibility for the consequences. Responsibility? Harrison repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. Spare me the moral philosophy. This is business, not a charity. Then let's talk business. Daniel pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos he'd taken during facility visits. This is Plant 4's main production line. See that equipment? Installed in 2003, it breaks down twice a week. Every breakdown costs us 6 hours of production while maintenance patches it back together. Last month alone, we lost $80,000 in delayed shipments because of equipment failures. He swiped to another photo. This is the logistics system Plant 7 uses to track inventory. Look familiar? It's running on Windows XP because upgrading would require investing in new hardware and training. So instead, we employ 3 people full-time just to manually reconcile system errors and generate reports that modern software could produce automatically. Another photo. This is the break room at Plant 9. Notice anything? No? That's because half the workers eat lunch at their stations because there aren't enough tables. We eliminated the second shift break room during restructuring 4 years ago to save $12,000 annually in maintenance costs. Know what we lost? The informal knowledge sharing that happened when experienced workers and new hires ate together. The mentorship, the team building. But sure, we saved $12,000. He set his phone down, meeting Harrison's glare directly. Every facility I've visited is full of these penny-wise, pound-foolish decisions. Death by 1,000 cuts, all justified by rational analysis that never considered what we were actually destroying. You want guaranteed returns? Invest in fixing the operational disasters we've created through decades of underinvestment. That's not speculation. That's basic maintenance. And if the board doesn't agree, Harrison challenged, if we decide the restructuring plan is still the better option, then you'll be making that decision with your eyes open, Evelyn said, knowing exactly what it costs and who pays the price. No more hiding behind corporate language and strategic objectives. No more pretending numbers on a spreadsheet aren't real people with real lives. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city where thousands of Meridian employees were working right now, unaware their futures were being decided in this room. I used to think leadership meant making hard choices quickly and moving on. That second-guessing was weakness, that the best executives were the ones who could eliminate positions without losing sleep. She turned back to face them. I was wrong. Real leadership isn't about making hard choices quickly. It's about having the courage to find better choices even when they're difficult and uncertain. Robert was watching her with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read, something between respect and concern. You're asking us to bet on humanity over efficiency, the older man said slowly, to trust that investing in people will pay off even when the market punishes long-term thinking. I'm asking you to remember that we're not just managing assets, we're shaping lives and communities, Evelyn replied, and that the choices we make in this room ripple out far beyond our balance sheets. The committee meeting ended shortly after without any resolution, just an agreement to reconvene in 3 days for a final vote. Daniel left corporate headquarters feeling exhausted and uncertain, his anger from the confrontation with Harrison fading into worry about what he'd potentially cost Evelyn. She caught up with him at the elevator bank, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Daniel, wait!" He turned, ready to apologize for overstepping, but she spoke first. "Thank you. For what you said in there, for not backing down when Harrison tried to dismiss you." "I probably made things worse," Daniel said. "Called out a board member, got emotional, definitely didn't help your case." "You told the truth. That's always helpful, even when it's uncomfortable." She pressed the elevator call button, and they waited in silence for a moment. "Harrison is going to vote against the proposal regardless. But some of the others, I saw them really listening when you talked about the operational issues, when you made it concrete instead of theoretical." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside, the door sliding shut on the gleaming corporate world. "Do you really think they'll approve it?" Daniel asked as they descended. "Honestly, I don't know." Evelyn leaned against the elevator wall, and for a moment she looked utterly depleted. "I've made the best case I can, provided every number they could possibly want, addressed every objection, laid out the implementation plan in excruciating detail. But at the end of the day, it comes down to whether they believe people are worth investing in, and I can't control that." The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and they walked outside into the cold January afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening snow, and the wind off Lake Michigan cut through Daniel's inadequate suit jacket. "What will you actually do if they reject it?" he asked. "Will you really resign?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Yes," she finally said. "I meant what I said in there. I can't be the person who signs off on destroying 1,200 lives. Not anymore. Not after everything I've learned these past 6 weeks. Even if your replacement does something worse, I can't control what comes after me. I can only control my own choices." She turned to face him fully. "You taught me that, actually. When you explained why you turned down promotions, you couldn't control the company's culture or priorities, but you could control whether you participated in perpetuating them. That's what I'm doing." A taxi pulled up to the curb, and Evelyn reached for the door handle before pausing. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," Daniel said, uncertain where this was going. "Do you regret getting involved in this? Spending 6 weeks away from your daughter, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, making yourself vulnerable in front of people like Harrison who don't value what you bring?" Daniel thought about Lucy asking why he was tired all the time, about the promises he'd made to never let work come before her, about how this entire situation had consumed his life in ways that looked uncomfortably similar to the patterns he'd sworn to avoid. But he also thought about Rosa Martinez and her nephews, about Marcus Williams and his widow, about the 1,200 people whose futures hung in the balance. "No," he said simply. "I don't regret it, because even if the board votes no, even if none of this makes a difference, at least we tried. At least we stood up and said people matter more than quarterly earnings. That's worth something." Evelyn smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her usual corporate composure into something almost radiant. "You're a better person than most of us deserve, Daniel Brooks." Then she was gone, sliding into the taxi and disappearing into Chicago traffic, leaving Daniel alone on the sidewalk with 3 days to wait and a decision weighing on his conscience. He went home and called his ex-wife. "Jennifer, I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause on the other end, and he could hear her shifting gears from whatever she'd been doing. "Is Lucy okay?" "Lucy's fine. This is about me, about work." He took a deep breath. "I've been helping with a major project at Meridian. It's important, potentially affects thousands of jobs, but it's taken up a lot of time I'd normally spend with Lucy, and I need to know if you think I'm repeating old patterns." Another pause, longer this time. Jennifer knew what he was asking, whether he was sliding back into the work obsession that had contributed to their divorce. "Are you doing it for you or for them?" she finally asked. "What?" "When you used to chase promotions, it was about you. Proving yourself, climbing the ladder, feeding your ego. Are you working on this project because it makes you feel important or because it actually helps people? Daniel thought about Harrison's contempt, about the exhausting committee meetings, about how much easier it would be to just walk away and let Evelyn fight her battles alone. It helps people, he said. Or it might, if we can convince the board to choose differently. Then you're not repeating old patterns, Jennifer said, and there was a warmth in her voice he hadn't heard in years. You're being who you've always been underneath the ambition, someone who gives a damn about doing the right thing. Lucy understands that even if she doesn't understand the details. She knows her daddy is trying to help people. I promised her things would go back to normal after this project ends. And will they? I don't know, Daniel admitted. Everything feels different now, like I can't go back to just fixing equipment and keeping my head down, pretending the bigger problems aren't my responsibility. Then maybe normal needs to change, Jennifer said gently. Maybe you've been playing small because you were afraid of becoming the person you used to be. But there's a middle path, Daniel. You can make a difference without sacrificing your daughter. You just have to be intentional about it. After they hung up, Daniel sat in his quiet apartment and let her words sink in. She was right. He had been playing small, choosing the safety of limited impact over the risk of meaningful engagement. He'd turned down promotions not just to be present for Lucy, but because he was afraid of what ambition might turn him into. But Evelyn had shown him something different. She'd started from a place of pure ambition, climbed to the top by making ruthless choices, and was now using that position to fight for something that mattered. Her power wasn't the problem. How she'd been using it was. What if he could do the same? Find a way to make a real difference without abandoning the principles that defined him? The question stayed with him through the next 3 days as he worked his regular shifts at Plant 7, his mind only half present while his hands went through familiar motions. His coworkers noticed the distraction but didn't comment. Everyone was preoccupied lately, rumors of restructuring circulating like a virus through the facility. On the morning of the final committee vote, Daniel dropped Lucy off at school and then sat in his car for 10 minutes, staring at his phone. Evelyn had texted him the night before. Final vote today? You don't have to be there, but I'd like you to be if you can. He should be at Plant 7. He had equipment to maintain, repairs to complete, a job to do. But there were 1,200 futures being decided in a boardroom downtown, and he'd helped build the case for saving them. Daniel called his supervisor and took a personal day. Then he drove to corporate headquarters, rode the elevator to the 34th floor, and took his seat along the wall of the boardroom where Evelyn was already preparing for the fight of her career. The vote itself was anticlimactic compared to the drama that had preceded it. The committee had reviewed all the data, heard all the arguments, spent 6 weeks examining every angle of both proposals. Now it came down to a simple choice. Robert called for the vote at exactly 10 a.m. All in favor of approving the alternative investment proposal as presented by CEO Cross? 5 hands went up immediately. The board members who'd been convinced from the start that workforce investment made sense. Daniel held his breath, watching the remaining 7 members. Slowly, deliberately, 2 more hands rose. 7 votes for, 5 against. The proposal had passed. The room erupted in muted corporate celebration, handshakes and professional congratulations that barely concealed the significance of what had just happened. Meridian Industries had chosen people over profits, long-term investment over short-term gains. But Daniel wasn't watching the celebration. He was watching Harrison, who'd voted against the proposal and was now gathering his papers with an expression of cold fury. The man caught Daniel's eye and held his gaze for a long moment, and there was a promise in that look. This wasn't over. Evelyn found Daniel after the committee dispersed, and there were tears streaming down her face, though she was smiling. "We did it," she said. We actually did it." "You did it," Daniel corrected. "I just provided some numbers." "You provided the why behind the numbers, the heart that made it matter." She wiped at her eyes, laughing at herself. "I'm crying in front of my board. Again. They're going to think I've lost my mind." "Maybe you have," Daniel said. "The good kind of loss, though. The kind that helps you find something better." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that passing the committee vote was just the beginning. The real battle, implementation, board politics, market reaction, was still to come. And Harrison's cold fury suggested that opposition wasn't finished fighting. Harrison's prediction came true faster than anyone expected. The stock dropped 6% within 48 hours of Meridian announcing the alternative investment strategy. Financial analysts called it misguided sentimentality masquerading as business planning. Business news outlets ran think pieces about whether Evelyn Cross had lost her edge. Institutional investors scheduled calls demanding explanations for why the company was prioritizing workforce development over shareholder returns. Daniel watched it all unfold from his position back at Plant 7, where he'd returned to his regular maintenance duties with a strange sense of disconnection. The conversations in the boardroom, the high-stakes decisions, the belief that they could actually change something. It all felt distant now, almost unreal compared to the immediate problems of hydraulic presses and conveyor systems. But the consequences were very real. 3 board members resigned within the first week, citing fundamental disagreements about strategic direction. Harrison gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal questioning whether Evelyn was emotionally compromised and suggesting the board should seriously evaluate leadership continuity. The attacks were personal, pointed, and designed to undermine everything they'd fought for. Evelyn called Daniel late on a Friday night, 2 weeks after the committee vote. He was helping Lucy with a school project, a diorama of the solar system using painted styrofoam balls, when his phone rang. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice tight with stress. "I know it's late, but I needed to hear a friendly voice." "What happened?" "The full board is meeting Monday morning for an emergency session. Harrison has been working behind the scenes, convincing other members that the investment plan is too risky, that we need to reconsider. He's calling for a vote of no confidence." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can try. If he gets enough votes, they can remove me as CEO and install someone who will approve the original restructuring plan." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks before the backlash started. Lucy tugged on Daniel's sleeve, holding up Saturn with its construction paper rings. He gave her a thumbs up while trying to focus on Evelyn's words. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I don't know. Reassurance? Perspective? Someone to tell me I'm not crazy for thinking people matter more than stock prices?" "You're not crazy," Daniel said firmly. "You're right, and the fact that it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong." "The employees don't even know yet," Evelyn continued, and he could hear her moving, probably pacing her office. "We haven't announced the implementation timeline or the investment details. All they know is the restructuring is on hold indefinitely. Some of them probably think we're just delaying the inevitable." "Then tell them the truth," Daniel said. "Don't wait for Harrison to control the narrative. Tell the employees what you're fighting for and why it matters." There was a long pause on the other end. "You're right. You're absolutely right." Her voice strengthened, some of the defeated tone fading. "I've been so focused on the board and the investors that I forgot about the people this actually affects. They deserve to know what's happening. And they deserve to hear it from you, not corporate PR," Daniel added. After they hung up, Lucy looked up at him with curious eyes. "Was that about your important project?" "Yeah, kiddo, it was." "Is it done yet? You said it would be done soon." Daniel pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Almost, just a little bit longer." But even as he said it, he wondered if that was true. Because it was becoming clear that this wasn't a project with a defined endpoint. It was a fundamental shift in how Meridian operated, and shifts like that didn't happen cleanly or quickly. Evelyn made good on her decision. That weekend, she scheduled town halls at all 6 Meridian facilities, announcing she'd personally address employees about the company's direction. The first one was Monday morning at Plant 7, 3 hours before the board's emergency session. Daniel arrived early to find the facility's main break room already packed with workers from all shifts. First shift had stayed late, second shift had come in early, and even some of the administrative staff had squeezed in to hear what their CEO had to say. The atmosphere was tense, uncertain. People knew something was happening, but not what it meant for them. Rosa Martinez caught Daniel's eye from across the room and gave him a small wave. She looked exhausted. Rumor was she'd been picking up extra hours wherever she could, terrified that the restructuring was just delayed, not canceled. Next to her stood Tim, the guy who told Evelyn about being restructured out of 3 previous jobs. His arms were crossed, his expression skeptical. When Evelyn walked in, the room went silent. She wasn't wearing her usual power suit. Instead, she'd chosen simple slacks and a blouse, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked almost approachable, almost like someone who might actually work on the factory floor. She stood at the front of the room without a podium, without notes, just facing the assembled workers with visible nervousness. "Thank you for being here," she began. "I know many of you took personal time or rearranged schedules to attend. I appreciate that, and I'll try not to waste it." She took a breath, and Daniel could see her gathering courage. 6 weeks ago, I was prepared to recommend a restructuring plan that would have eliminated 1,200 positions across our facilities, including 300 here at Plant 7. The board was ready to approve it. The financial case was sound. It would have improved our quarterly earnings and satisfied our investors. The room remained silent, but the tension was palpable. People leaning forward, faces tight with fear and anger. "I didn't approve it," Evelyn continued, "not because I'm opposed to difficult decisions or blind to financial realities, but because I realized we had an alternative. A harder alternative, a riskier alternative, but a better one." She moved closer to the crowd, her corporate veneer completely stripped away. "I spent New Year's Eve driving around Chicago, trying to convince myself that eliminating 1,200 jobs was necessary. Inevitable, just business. And I couldn't do it, because I kept thinking about my father, who spent 37 years working in a factory before being restructured out of his position 3 years before retirement. The stress killed him, literally, and I realized I'd become exactly what destroyed him." The confession hung in the air. Several workers exchanged glances, surprised by the raw honesty. "So instead of approving the restructuring, I'm proposing we invest $320 million in modernizing our facilities, upgrading our equipment, and developing our workforce. We're going to fix the operational problems that have been holding you back for years. New production systems, updated logistics software, proper staffing levels, training programs that actually prepare people for advancement." Rosa's hand shot up. "What's the catch?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "The catch is it's going to hurt financially in the short term. Our stock price has already dropped 6%. Some board members are calling for my removal. Investors are questioning whether we've lost focus on profitability. And there's an emergency board meeting this morning where they might vote to reverse this decision and go back to the original restructuring plan." The room erupted in murmurs. Tim's skeptical expression had shifted to something closer to alarm. "So why are you here telling us this?" someone called from the back. "Why not wait until after the board meeting?" "Because you deserve to know what I'm fighting for," Evelyn said simply. "Because if the board removes me today and my replacement approves the restructuring, you should understand that there was an alternative, that someone tried to choose differently." She paused, and Daniel could see emotion flickering across her face. "And because I need you to know that you matter, not as labor costs or productivity metrics or positions on an organizational chart, but as people, as Rosa supporting her family, as Tim who's been restructured one too many times, as every single person in this room who shows up and does the work that makes this company run." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what the board will decide today. I don't know if I'll still be CEO by this afternoon, but I know that standing here, telling you the truth, is more important than protecting my position. And if I lose everything fighting for this, at least I'll lose it for something that matters." The silence that followed was different from before, not tense with fear, but heavy with emotion. Then slowly, someone started clapping. Rosa. Within seconds, the entire room joined in. Not polite corporate applause, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. Evelyn looked stunned, her eyes shining with tears she didn't try to hide. She'd probably received hundreds of standing ovations at industry conferences and shareholder meetings, but Daniel suspected this one meant more than all of them combined. When the applause finally died down, Tim raised his hand. "What do you need from us?" Evelyn blinked, surprised by the question. "I don't understand." "You're fighting for us," Tim said, and his gruff voice was thick with emotion. "What can we do to help you fight?" The question seemed to catch Evelyn completely off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked helplessly at Daniel. He stood, joining her at the front of the room. "The board responds to two things," he said. "Financial performance and public pressure. We can't change the stock price overnight, but we can show them that this decision has support, that employees are behind it, that communities care. How? Rosa asked. Letters, Daniel said, thinking quickly. Emails to board members explaining what this investment means to you. Not angry demands, just honest stories about why workforce stability matters, why this company is worth fighting for. The board needs to understand they're not just making financial decisions, they're affecting real lives and real communities. Another worker, a younger guy Daniel recognized from the maintenance crew, spoke up. What about media? My sister works for the Tribune. If we can get some human interest stories out there, put faces to the numbers, that might help with public pressure. Ideas started flowing then, workers offering suggestions and volunteering to help. Someone knew a local news producer. Someone else had contacts with the alderman's office. A third person suggested organizing a petition among employees across all facilities. Evelyn watched it all with an expression of wonder, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. When the meeting finally broke up, people rushing off to start their shifts or head home, she stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming freely down her face. I've never had anyone fight for me before, she said quietly to Daniel. I've had employees, subordinates, people who did what I told them because I signed their paychecks. But nobody's ever fought for me. They're not just fighting for you, Daniel said gently. They're fighting for themselves, for their families, for the possibility that maybe loyalty and hard work actually means something. You just gave them permission to hope. The emergency board meeting started at 11 a.m. Daniel didn't attend. He'd already used too much personal time, and he needed to be at Plant 7 doing his actual job. But he watched the clock obsessively, imagining what was happening in that boardroom 30 miles away. Evelyn texted him at 11:47. Harrison made his case. Vote in 10 minutes. At noon, his phone rang. Unknown number. Daniel Brooks? The voice was unfamiliar, male, older. Speaking. This is Robert Chen. We met at the committee meetings. Daniel's heart rate spiked. Yes, sir. I remember. I wanted you to know the no-confidence vote failed. 7-5 against. Evelyn remained CEO, and the investment plan stands. Relief flooded through him so powerfully, his knees went weak. Thank you for telling me. Don't thank me yet. The vote was close, and Harrison is already planning his next move. He's convinced several major institutional investors to demand a special shareholders meeting in 60 days. If Evelyn can't show meaningful progress on implementation by then, they'll push for her removal through official channels. 60 days isn't very long to modernize 6 facilities. No, it isn't, Robert agreed, which is why she'll need help. Your help, specifically. Daniel was quiet, processing the implication. Evelyn is creating a new position, Robert continued, Director of Workforce Development and Operational Excellence. It's a senior role reporting directly to her. The job is to oversee implementation of the investment plan, ensure employee voices are heard in strategic decisions, and bridge the gap between executive planning and operational reality. That sounds like an important position, Daniel said carefully. It is. And Evelyn wants to offer it to you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and complication. I'm a maintenance engineer, Daniel said. I don't have an MBA or executive experience. I'm not qualified for a senior leadership role. You have something more valuable than qualifications, Robert replied. You have credibility. Workers trust you. You understand operations from the ground up, and you've already demonstrated you can think strategically while maintaining ethical clarity. That's a rare combination. I have a daughter. I can't work 80-hour weeks or travel constantly, or the position comes with autonomy to set your own schedule within reason. Evelyn was very clear about that. She said you'd taught her that being present for the people who matter is more important than career advancement. She wants to build that principle into how senior roles function at Meridian. Daniel leaned against the nearest wall, his mind racing. This was everything he'd turned down before: advancement, influence, the ability to make real change. But it was also everything he'd feared: the demands, the pressure, the risk of becoming the person he'd sworn he wouldn't be. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Evelyn will call you tonight to discuss details. But Daniel? She needs you. We all do. What you two started isn't sustainable without someone driving implementation who actually believes in it. After Robert hung up, Daniel stood in the Plant 7 hallway, staring at his reflection in the glass windows overlooking the production floor. Workers moved below, operating equipment, carrying materials, doing the essential work that kept everything running. His phone buzzed, a text from Lucy's school about an upcoming field trip. Parent chaperones needed. He'd already volunteered, had it marked on his calendar in red ink. Could he do both? Be the father Lucy needed and the leader Meridian needed? Or was he fooling himself, romanticizing the possibility of having it all when experience had taught him that advancement always came with costs? The call from Evelyn came that evening after Lucy was in bed. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by the familiar comfort of his small apartment, and listened as she laid out her vision. The director role isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter, she explained. You'd have a team, real resources, authority to make decisions without running everything through 5 layers of approval. And most importantly, you'd have my complete support to push back when something doesn't align with our principles. What does that actually look like day to day? Daniel asked. Daniel Jason. Oversight of facility modernization projects, direct communication with plant managers and workforce leads, analyzing operational data to identify improvement opportunities, developing training programs, mediating conflicts between executive priorities and employee needs. She paused. Being the voice in every leadership meeting that asks whether we're actually living our values or just talking about them. That's going to make me unpopular with a lot of executives. Probably, Evelyn agreed, but it'll make you invaluable to the company. And Daniel, I need someone in that role who won't be seduced by the power or corrupted by the pressure. Someone who's already proven they'll choose integrity over advancement. Daniel thought about Harrison's contempt, about the board members who'd voted against the investment plan, about the 60-day deadline looming over everything. What happens if we fail? He asked. If the implementation doesn't show results fast enough, if Harrison succeeds in removing you, if the whole thing collapses? Then we fail, knowing we tried, Evelyn said simply. And you go back to Plant 7 with your conscience intact and your daughter still your priority. But if we don't try, if you stay in maintenance and I fight this alone, we've already failed. Because sustainable change requires more than one person's commitment. It requires building a culture where doing the right thing is normal instead of heroic. She was right. He knew she was right. One person couldn't change an entire company's culture, but maybe 2 could start. Maybe a CEO and a maintenance engineer working together could demonstrate that profit and principles didn't have to be mutually exclusive. I need guarantees, Daniel said, about schedule flexibility, about protecting my time with Lucy, about not becoming the kind of absent parent I swore I'd never be. Name them. They spent the next hour negotiating terms that would have been unthinkable in any traditional corporate role. No evening meetings after 6 p.m. unless absolutely critical. No weekend work except during genuine emergencies. Autonomy to work remotely when Lucy was sick or had school events. Authority to push back on unreasonable deadlines without fear of retaliation. Evelyn agreed to everything without hesitation. This is how senior roles should function, she said. The expectation that leadership requires sacrificing your personal life is exactly the kind of toxic culture we're trying to change. If we can't offer you terms that let you be a present father, we have no business asking anyone else to sacrifice for this company. By the time they hung up, Daniel had accepted the position. He sat in his quiet apartment, staring at his daughter's drawings on the refrigerator, and wondered if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the biggest mistake. The next morning, he told Lucy over breakfast, "Daddy's getting a new job at work. It's still the same company, but I'll be helping make things better for a lot of people." Lucy looked up from her cereal, milk dripping off her spoon. "Will you still come to my field trip?" "Absolutely. That's not changing." "Will you still make pancakes on Saturday mornings?" "Every Saturday, kiddo. That's a promise." She seemed satisfied with that, returning to her cereal, but then she looked up again with those impossibly perceptive eyes. "Are you scared?" The question caught him off guard. He could lie, give her an easy reassurance, but she deserved better than that. "Yeah, I'm a little scared. It's a big job with a lot of responsibility, but sometimes the things that scare us are the things most worth doing." Lucy nodded seriously, processing this wisdom with the gravity only a 7-year-old could muster. Like when I was scared to try the monkey bars, but I did it anyway, and now they're my favorite? Exactly like that. The announcement of Daniel's new role sent shockwaves through Meridian. A maintenance engineer jumping to senior leadership was unprecedented, and reactions ranged from enthusiastic support among floor workers to outright hostility from some executives who saw it as an insult to their credentials and experience. Harrison, predictably, was furious. He called Daniel directly 2 days after the announcement, his voice cold with barely controlled anger. You think you can waltz into executive leadership with no formal training, no business education, no relevant experience? You're going to fail spectacularly, and you'll take Evelyn down with you. Maybe, Daniel replied calmly, but at least we'll fail trying to do something meaningful instead of succeeding at doing something harmful. You're naive, idealistic. This company operates in a competitive global market with razor-thin margins and ruthless competition. Your folksy wisdom about treating people nicely won't survive contact with real-world pressures. I guess we'll find out. Harrison hung up without another word, but the threat was clear. He'd be watching, waiting for Daniel to stumble, ready to use any mistake as ammunition against Evelyn's leadership. The first 60 days of implementation were brutal. Daniel coordinated equipment upgrades across 3 facilities simultaneously while managing resistance from plant managers who resented taking orders from someone they'd considered a peer weeks earlier. He mediated disputes between executives pushing for faster results and workers demanding sustainable changes. He attended meetings that tested every ounce of his patience and diplomatic skills. But slowly, gradually, things started to shift. Plant 7's new logistics software reduced processing time by 40% within the first month. Equipment upgrades at Plant 4 eliminated 70% of the downtime that had plagued production for years. Training programs gave workers pathways to advancement they'd never had before, and turnover started dropping across all facilities. The results weren't dramatic enough to satisfy investors clamoring for immediate returns. The stock price remained depressed. Financial analysts remained skeptical. But on the factory floors, in the break rooms and production lines where actual work happened, people started believing that maybe things could be different. Rosa Martinez was promoted to line supervisor, her years of experience finally recognized and rewarded. Tim, the skeptic who'd been restructured too many times, was selected for an advanced manufacturing certification program that would triple his earnings potential. Workers who'd been bracing for pink slips started making long-term plans again, buying homes, enrolling kids in better schools, dreaming beyond survival. And through it all, Daniel kept his promises to Lucy. He made her field trip as a chaperone, dressed as a parent volunteer instead of an executive, helping 7-year-olds navigate the science museum. He made pancakes every Saturday morning. He tucked her in every night he wasn't traveling, reading stories and answering questions about planets and dinosaurs and why some people were mean. Jennifer noticed the change when she dropped Lucy off one Wednesday evening. "You look different," she said, studying him in the doorway. "Tired, but good tired, like you're actually living instead of just surviving." "It's been intense," Daniel admitted. "But yeah, I think I'm finally figuring out how to do meaningful work without sacrificing what matters most." "Lucy talks about you constantly, about how Daddy is helping people at work, how you're making things better. She's proud of you." Jennifer smiled. "I'm proud of you too. This is who you were always meant to be. Just took you a while to figure out how to do it without losing yourself." The shareholders' meeting arrived exactly 60 days after the board vote, and the atmosphere in the Meridian auditorium was electric with tension. Institutional investors filled the front rows, their expressions skeptical and demanding. Employees from various facilities had also shown up, having organized carpools and taken personal time to attend. The room was split between those who wanted Evelyn removed and those who believed she deserved more time. Harrison was there, of course, sitting in the front row with a stack of prepared remarks and an expression of grim satisfaction. He'd spent 2 months building his case, rallying opposition, preparing for this moment. Evelyn stood at the podium, and Daniel sat in the front row of the employee section, close enough to see the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the microphone. "Good morning," she began. "I know many of you are here because you're concerned about Meridian's direction. You've seen our stock price decline. You've read the analyst reports questioning our strategy. You want to know if your investment is safe." She paused, meeting the gaze of various shareholders scattered throughout the room. I can't promise you quick returns or dramatic stock appreciation. What I can promise is that we're building something sustainable, something that will exist and thrive 10 years from now, not just next quarter. She clicked to the first slide, operational metrics from the past 60 days. Plant 7 processing time down 40%. Plant 4 equipment downtime down 70%. Training program enrollment up 300%. Employee turnover down 22% across all facilities. These aren't just numbers, they're indicators that our investment strategy is working. Harrison stood, interrupting. Those metrics are cherry-picked and don't reflect the overall financial impact. Our quarterly earnings are down 12%. Our stock price has lost 18% of its value. You're bankrupting this company with your social experiment. I'm rebuilding this company with a sustainable strategy, Evelyn countered, her voice sharp. And yes, it's costing us in the short term, but the alternative was eliminating 1,200 positions, decimating our institutional knowledge, and hoping automation could replace decades of human expertise. That's not a strategy. That's giving up. The room erupted in competing reactions. Some shareholders shouting support for Harrison, others defending Evelyn. Employees began a spontaneous chant, "Give her time! Give her time!" The meeting devolved into controlled chaos for several minutes before the board chair finally restored order and called for the vote on Harrison's motion to remove Evelyn as CEO and reverse the investment strategy. The vote was called by shareholder percentage, not individual count. Major institutional investors controlled massive blocks of stock, and their votes would determine the outcome. The first 3 voted to remove Evelyn. Harrison's coalition was strong, but then Robert Chen, representing a significant employee pension fund, voted to keep her. 2 smaller institutional investors followed suit. The vote came down to a single major shareholder, a venture capital firm that controlled 11% of outstanding shares. The representative, a woman in her 30s named Sarah Kim, stood to address the room. Our firm has reviewed the implementation data extensively, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent auditorium. And while the short-term financial impact is concerning, the operational improvements are undeniable. More importantly, we've observed something rare in modern corporate leadership, a CEO willing to risk her position for principle. That kind of integrity is an asset, not a liability. She paused, making eye contact with Evelyn. We vote to retain current leadership and continue the investment strategy with a 6-month progress review. The room exploded. Cheers from employees, angry protests from Harrison's supporters. The vote was effectively over. Evelyn would remain CEO, the investment strategy would continue, and Meridian had chosen a different path forward. Daniel watched Evelyn accept congratulations from board members and employees, saw her shake hands and smile through tears, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for years. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to keep fighting. Afterward, as the auditorium emptied, Evelyn found Daniel standing near the back row. "We did it," she said simply. "You did it," he corrected. "I just helped with the numbers." "We both know that's not true." She glanced around the emptying room. 6 months until the next review. Think we can show enough progress to survive another vote? "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that we're going to spend the next 6 months proving that doing the right thing can also be the profitable thing. And if we fail, at least we'll fail together." Evelyn smiled, the genuine, unguarded smile he'd first seen in his apartment months ago. "Together," she agreed. "That's better than I've had in a long time." The 6 months between shareholder meetings passed in a blur of implementation challenges, small victories, and the constant pressure of proving that choosing people over profits could actually work. Daniel found himself living in a strange, liminal space between his old life and his new one. No longer just a maintenance engineer, but not quite comfortable in the executive meetings where strategic decisions were made by people who'd attended Ivy League business schools and spoke in acronyms he had to look up later. But he showed up anyway, bringing his spreadsheets and his operational knowledge and his stubborn insistence that every decision should be evaluated not just by its impact on quarterly earnings, but by its impact on actual human beings. Some executives found this refreshing. Others found it infuriating. Harrison, unsurprisingly, found it intolerable. The harassment started subtle. Questions about Daniel's qualifications in meetings, pointed comments about his lack of formal business training, suggestions that perhaps Evelyn's judgment had been compromised by sentimentality. Daniel endured it with gritted teeth and the knowledge that responding to provocation would only validate Harrison's claims that he didn't belong in leadership. But the subtle harassment escalated to something more serious in late April when Daniel discovered that someone had been systematically undermining his equipment modernization projects. Delayed shipments, incorrect specifications, purchase orders mysteriously canceled and then reinstated weeks later at higher prices. Small sabotages designed to make his initiatives appear incompetent and wasteful. It took him 3 weeks of investigation to trace the interference back to Harrison's office, specifically to a senior procurement manager who reported directly to Harrison and had been quietly countermanding Daniel's orders while making it look like supplier problems or administrative errors. Daniel brought the evidence to Evelyn late one Friday evening, spreading printouts across her desk. Emails, shipping records, timeline analyses showing the pattern of deliberate obstruction. Evelyn studied the documents with increasing fury, her jaw tightening with each page. "This is sabotage," she said flatly. "Harrison is actively trying to make you fail." "And by extension, make you fail," Daniel added. "If my projects collapse, it undermines the entire investment strategy, gives ammunition to anyone arguing we should have stuck with the restructuring plan. I can bring this to the board, demand Harrison's removal." "No," Daniel interrupted. She looked up, surprised. "If we make this a board fight, it becomes political. He said, she said. Harrison denies everything, accuses us of paranoia, uses it to further divide the board. We need a different approach." "What are you suggesting?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking through the angles. "We don't confront him directly. Instead, we quietly shift procurement oversight for modernization projects to a different department, one Harrison doesn't control. We document everything he's done but hold it in reserve. And we make sure the next 6 months of implementation are so successful that his sabotage becomes irrelevant." "That's a risky strategy," Evelyn said. "It lets him continue operating. But it doesn't give him the dramatic confrontation he wants. And when the shareholder review comes, we present results that speak for themselves. No excuses about sabotage, just undeniable progress." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, studying Daniel with an expression he'd come to recognize, the look she got when she was recalibrating her instincts, choosing a harder path over an easier one. "You're more politically savvy than you give yourself credit for," she finally said. "I'm learning from the best." They implemented the changes quietly, restructuring procurement channels, establishing new oversight protocols, closing the gaps Harrison had been exploiting. The sabotage stopped, and the modernization projects accelerated. By early summer, Plant 7 was operating at capacity levels not seen in 5 years. Plant 4 had taken on 2 major contracts they would have turned down under the old system. Employee retention was up across all facilities, and the training programs were producing tangible results as workers advanced into higher-skilled positions. But the human impact went beyond metrics and operational improvements. Daniel saw it every time he visited facilities and talked to workers whose lives had changed because someone had chosen to invest in them rather than eliminate them. Rosa Martinez pulled him aside during a Plant 7 visit in June, her eyes bright with excitement. "My nephew got accepted to the community college engineering program," she said. "He's going to be the first person in our family to go to college. And it's because we didn't lose the apartment, didn't have to move, didn't have to disrupt everything, because you and Ms. Cross fought for us." Stories like that accumulated over the months. The single father who could finally afford his daughter's asthma medication because he'd been promoted instead of laid off. The couple who bought their first house because they believed their jobs were secure. The grandmother who could retire with dignity because her pension remained intact. Daniel kept a file of these stories, not for any official purpose, but because they reminded him why the exhaustion and the political games and the constant pressure were worth it. When Harrison's sneering contempt got under his skin, when another executive questioned his credentials, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing, he'd read these stories and remember that numbers on spreadsheets represented real lives, real families, real futures. His own life had found a rhythm that felt sustainable, though precarious. Lucy was thriving, her second-grade teacher reporting that she seemed happier and more confident. Jennifer had remarked during a custody exchange that whatever Daniel was doing, it was working. Lucy talked constantly about how proud she was of her daddy helping people, but the pressure was taking its toll. Daniel was working 60-hour weeks despite his best efforts to maintain boundaries, the complexity of implementation requiring constant attention and problem solving. He was eating poorly, sleeping worse, and running on coffee and determination. Evelyn noticed during a late August meeting when Daniel dozed off briefly while reviewing quarterly projections. "When's the last time you took a day off?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Daniel rubbed his eyes, embarrassed. "I don't know, a few weeks?" "Try 2 months. I checked your time records." She closed her laptop decisively. "You're burning out, and that helps no one. Take the weekend. Actually rest. That's not a suggestion. It's an order. We have the procurement review on Monday, which I can handle alone. Daniel, you're invaluable to this company, but you're not invincible. If you collapse from exhaustion, we lose everything you bring. So go home. Be with your daughter. Remember why we're fighting." It was good advice, and Daniel knew it. That Saturday, he and Lucy spent the entire day at the zoo, just the two of them, phones turned off, work completely forgotten. They watched the penguins and ate overpriced ice cream, and Lucy's laughter was the best sound Daniel had heard in months. That night, after she was asleep, he sat on his couch in the familiar quiet of his apartment and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of problems or challenges, but the deep satisfaction of living aligned with his values, of doing work that mattered while being present for the person who mattered most. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Board just confirmed 6-month review date, October 15th. 3 weeks to show we've earned their continued support. 3 weeks to prove that choosing people over profits had been the right call. 3 weeks to demonstrate that sustainable success was possible." Daniel looked around his modest apartment, Lucy's drawings on the refrigerator, her stuffed animals scattered across the couch. The simple life he'd built by choosing presence over prestige. He thought about the boardroom where he'd first challenged Evelyn's definition of leadership, about the shareholders who'd bet on their vision despite the risks, about the 1,200 employees whose futures depended on what happened in 3 weeks. The pressure should have been crushing. Instead, it felt clarifying. They'd done the work, made the investments, achieved the results. Now they just had to prove it. The final 3 weeks before the shareholder review were the most intense of Daniel's life. Every metric was scrutinized, every success documented, every remaining challenge addressed with brutal efficiency. Evelyn worked alongside him, the two of them functioning as a seamless team, her strategic vision combined with his operational expertise creating something neither could have achieved alone. Robert Chen visited headquarters during the final week, ostensibly for a routine board update, but clearly to assess their readiness for the shareholder meeting. "How confident are you?" he asked Daniel during a private conversation in the executive break room. "Confident in our results. Less confident in whether they'll be enough to satisfy investors who want immediate returns." Robert nodded slowly, stirring his coffee. Harrison has been working the phones, building support for another removal vote. He's arguing that even if the operational improvements are real, the financial cost is too high, that shareholders deserve better returns than corporate social responsibility projects. "And what do you think?" Daniel asked. The older man was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup like it held answers. "I think," he finally said, "that I've spent 40 years in business watching companies destroy themselves chasing quarterly earnings, gutting workforces for short-term gains, sacrificing stability for stock appreciation. And I'm tired of it, tired of being part of a system that treats human beings as disposable." He looked up, meeting Daniel's gaze. "What you and Evelyn are doing, it's risky and difficult and might fail spectacularly. But it's also the first time in decades I've seen corporate leadership actually try to build something sustainable instead of just extracting value until there's nothing left. So yes, I'll vote to continue your strategy, and I'll work to convince other board members to do the same. But Daniel?" "Yes?" "You need to be prepared for the possibility that it won't be enough, that Harrison wins, that Evelyn gets removed, that everything you've built gets dismantled. What will you do then?" Daniel thought about the question seriously, about what failure would mean for him, for Evelyn, for the employees who'd started believing their loyalty mattered. "I'll go back to Plant 7, he said. "Back to fixing equipment and being present for my daughter. And I'll know that for 1 year, we tried to do something that mattered. That's more than most people can say." Robert smiled faintly. "You're either very wise or very naive. I haven't decided which." "Probably both," Daniel admitted. The day of the shareholder review arrived with autumn colors painting Chicago in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel dressed in his best suit, still the same one from his grandmother's funeral, but tailored now to fit properly, and met Evelyn in the lobby of Meridian headquarters at 7 a.m. She looked exhausted but determined, carrying a presentation folder thick with documentation and evidence of everything they'd accomplished. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." The auditorium was even more packed than 6 months ago. Institutional investors, board members, employees from across all facilities, media representatives covering what had become a high-profile case study in corporate governance. The air was electric with anticipation and tension. Harrison was already there, sitting in his customary front-row position, flanked by supporters. When he saw Daniel and Evelyn enter, his expression was coldly triumphant, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. The meeting began with standard procedural matters before moving to the main event, evaluation of Meridian's strategic direction and leadership performance. Evelyn took the podium and delivered the most important presentation of her career. She started with numbers, hard data showing operational improvements across every meaningful metric. Production efficiency up 37% at modernized facilities. Equipment downtime reduced by 62%. Employee turnover down 41% company-wide. Quality defects decreased by 53%. New contract acquisitions up 28%. The numbers were undeniable, impressive, exactly what they'd hoped to achieve, but Evelyn didn't stop there. "These metrics tell part of the story," she said, "but they don't capture the human reality behind them. So I want to share some of that reality with you." She clicked to a video, employee testimonials they'd collected over the past month. Rosa Martinez talking about her nephew's college acceptance. Tim describing how the training program had given him the first real career advancement opportunity in 20 years. A Plant 4 worker explaining how equipment upgrades had made his job safer and more efficient. A young engineer discussing how Meridian's investment in workforce development had convinced her to stay instead of taking a position with a competitor. The testimonials were powerful, emotional, impossible to dismiss as mere sentiment. They were workers describing tangible improvements in their lives because a company had chosen to invest in them. When the video ended, Evelyn faced the assembled shareholders directly. "6 months ago, I asked you to take a risk on a different kind of corporate strategy, to prioritize sustainability over short-term profits, people over efficiency metrics. Many of you were skeptical, rightfully so. The market punished us. Our stock price dropped. Analysts questioned our judgment." She paused, letting the acknowledgement settle. "But we persevered. We executed. We proved that investing in workforce development and operational excellence creates value that extends beyond quarterly earnings. Yes, our stock is still below where it was a year ago, but our operational capacity is 40% higher. Our workforce is more skilled, more loyal, more productive. We're winning contracts we couldn't have competed for under the old system, and we're building something that will last." Harrison stood, interrupting. "With all due respect, CEO Cross, sustainability is a luxury we can't afford when shareholders are losing money. Your social experiment has cost investors hundreds of millions in market value. That's unacceptable." "What's unacceptable," Evelyn replied, her voice sharp, "is treating market value as the only measure of success while ignoring every other indicator of company health. Our fundamentals are stronger than they've been in a decade. Our workforce stability gives us competitive advantages our rivals can't match. Our operational efficiency means we can take on higher margin contracts. This isn't a social experiment. It's sound business strategy with a longer time horizon than you're comfortable with." "The market disagrees," Harrison shot back. "Our stock price reflects investor judgment that your strategy is failing. The market is wrong." The bluntness of Evelyn's statement sent ripples through the audience. CEOs didn't typically contradict market wisdom so directly. "The market rewards quarterly performance and punishes long-term investment," Evelyn continued. The market encouraged the short-term thinking that nearly destroyed this company before I became CEO. The market would have us eliminate 1,200 jobs for an 8% earnings bump while ignoring the operational collapse that would follow. So yes, the market disagrees with our strategy. And I'm fine with that because we're not building this company for day traders and quarterly speculators. We're building it for the long term. The room erupted in competing reactions. Some shareholders applauding, others shouting disagreement. Harrison was on his feet, demanding order, calling for the removal vote. That's when Daniel stood. He hadn't planned to speak. His role was support, not leadership. But watching Harrison try to reduce everything they'd accomplished to market fluctuations and quarterly metrics, he couldn't stay silent. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "May I say something?" The room quieted, surprised by the interruption from someone who wasn't scheduled to present. "I'm Daniel Brooks, Director of Workforce Development. Before that, I was a maintenance engineer at Plant 7. And before this meeting turns into a referendum on stock prices, I want to tell you what's actually happening in our facilities." He moved to the front of the room, standing beside Evelyn. "A year ago, I was fixing equipment that should have been replaced a decade earlier, working with people who'd stopped believing their loyalty mattered, watching good employees burn out because they were expected to do impossible things with inadequate resources. That was Meridian under the old strategy, profitable on paper, collapsing in reality." He looked directly at Harrison. "You talk about market value and investor returns like they exist independently of operational reality. They don't. Every dollar of market value is built on people doing actual work with actual equipment and actual facilities. And when you treat those people as expendable, when you underinvest in equipment and training and operational capacity, you're borrowing from the future to pay for the present." Daniel pulled out his phone, displaying a photo of Plant 7's production floor. "This is what sustainable success looks like. Workers who believe in what they're building, equipment that actually works, processes that maximize efficiency without sacrificing safety or quality. You can't see this on a stock ticker, but it's real, it's valuable, and it's what will keep this company competitive 10 years from now when our rivals are dealing with the consequences of their own short-sighted cost-cutting." He pocketed his phone and faced the assembled shareholders. "I understand you're frustrated by the stock performance. I get that you want returns on your investments, but I'm asking you to consider what you're actually investing in. Are you investing in a company that extracts maximum value in minimum time, regardless of long-term consequences? Or are you investing in a company that builds sustainable competitive advantages by treating its workforce as an asset worth developing?" The room was absolutely silent now. Everyone focused on the maintenance engineer turned executive, making an impassioned case for a strategy most corporations had abandoned decades ago. 6 months ago, 1,200 people were facing unemployment because it was easier to eliminate positions than to solve operational problems. Today, those same 1,200 people are more productive, more skilled, and more valuable to this company than ever before. That's not sentimentality, that's strategic asset management. Daniel looked at Evelyn, who was watching him with tears in her eyes, then back to the shareholders. "Vote however your conscience and your analysis dictate, but understand what you're voting for. If you remove Evelyn and reverse this strategy, you're not just changing leadership. You're telling every employee at Meridian that their loyalty and dedication don't matter as much as quarterly earnings, and once you send that message, you can never take it back." He returned to his seat in silence, his heart pounding, wondering if he just helped their cause or destroyed it. The vote was called shortly after. Sarah Kim from the venture capital firm spoke first, her support unchanged. Robert Chen voted to continue the current strategy, his voice firm and clear. 3 other institutional investors followed suit, but Harrison's coalition had grown. 5 major shareholders voted for removal and strategy reversal, their combined holdings representing 43% of outstanding shares. The vote came down, again, to a handful of smaller institutional investors and the employee pension fund representatives. Each vote was announced individually, the percentages tallying in real time on the screen behind the board chair. When the final vote was counted, the results showed 52% support for continuing Evelyn's leadership and strategy. 48% opposed. They'd won, barely, by the narrowest possible margin. The room erupted in reactions ranging from jubilant celebration to angry protests. Harrison stormed out without a word, his face purple with rage. Board members clustered in urgent conversations. Employees cheered and embraced, their jobs and futures secured for at least another year. Daniel sat in his seat, numb with relief and exhaustion, barely processing what had just happened. They'd survived. Against incredible odds, despite sabotage and opposition and market pressure, they'd survived. Evelyn found him in the chaos, pulling him to his feet and into a hug that was entirely inappropriate for corporate settings and absolutely necessary for two people who just bet everything on doing the right thing and somehow won